good morning. I'm Carolina.
Hi, I'm Annalisa.
And we'd like to welcome you to the second episode of The Real Place.
The Real Place is a brand new podcast. It's the first of its kind, global exclusive, and it's filmed entirely in the Gemba virtual reality workplace.
For every episode, we send an Oculus Quest wireless VR headset to our guest, whatever they are in the world, and me and Annalisa put on our quests and jump into the virtual world to meet and interview them. For every episode, we invite true experts, visionaries, people who've been there, done that, and have the scars to prove it. And the premise of the podcast is that each one of them gives us just one prediction for the future.
It could be a prediction about how we're going to work or how a specific industry is going to change, or it could be even very focused on one individual, one company, or one challenge. Either way, it's about going beyond the buzzwords and really getting to grips with how the changes happening in society today are going to affect us.
And I'm sure, just like me, you've read countless blogs and articles during lockdown about how this or that is going to change. What we want to know is how those at the forefront of the world's top brands think and act, really peeling back the layers to understand how we could be doing things differently to progress and create positive change.
Thanks, Carolina. That brings us on to our guest for today. Now, with performance expectations for managers at an all-time high, the ability to execute and get things done is seen as the key driver for success. But what's often omitted is really how to get through to your teams and how to lead them to success. For today's episode, we're very lucky to speak with esteemed leader, CBE Amanda Nevill, perhaps better known for her work as Chief Executive at the British Film Institute. Her impressive history of leadership makes her the perfect guest to share exactly what it takes to lead and motivate your people.
And just before we jump in, make sure to stick around until the end of the episode as we ask our guests to nominate a colleague, partner, or a rival to join us in The Real Place next time. So stay tuned for that and enjoy the episode. Today, this morning, we are absolutely honored to have you, Amanda, in our presence in the Real Place podcast with us, in the Gemba world. And what we wanted to share with our audience today is how beautiful you are as a person, but also to share a little bit of the real Amanda and what you have achieved over, I guess, decades. So as a true visionary, we want to have your kind of feedback on what you think of the future and what really resonates with you at the moment. What's on your mind?
I think what's always really central to my mind is, so, I always, as you just alluded to, sadly, I mean, it's very good we're talking in avatar, because every time I look in the mirror nowadays, I get more and more depressed. But the older you get, you sort of think, I thought when I was younger that it would be a bit like walking up a mountain, and that the higher you got up that mountain, a better view you would get of the whole of humanity. And I always thought, because I'm such an optimist, that I would look back, and it seemed to me that humanity and society was going in a really great way. And actually, the higher I get, the more anxious I get on lots of fronts. So things that really, really worry me is it feels like there is a complete polarization of people who have and who have not. And, in that context, I'm so lucky because obviously I've been brought up in a life of privilege and have. And a lot of that, I realise, has been built on the back of people who have not, the people who, create all stuff that we consume, for example. So I really worry about that. And really, it feels in the world that it's very polarised between those that understand there has to be a global mission, but it's a global mission to sort that, which I think has to be delivered at a local level. So when I'm talking to people, sometimes you feel very disempowered in an ability to sort some of those big issues out in the world. And I always say to people, you have to, that old saying starts at home. And I think the word kindness is terribly underrated, as a word. So my prediction is, I don't know whether it's a prediction, but I think my hope is that we somehow have to start thinking not in a fundamental polarized way. We have to start thinking about our fellow beings on this planet and how we're going to try and level out that terrible gap, both, geographically and socially and economically, that I think is reaching a quite dangerous point in the current time.
That
That's
is incredible.
probably very relevant, I guess, to what we've experienced over the last few months. I suppose, would you say that these issues have been exacerbated by the recent situation, obviously the pandemic and everything that's been happening?
Yes, and I think whether it's been it has I don't know whether it's been exacerbated by it, but I think what it's definitely done is it's given it a cruel outline. So whereas before I don't think it was as visible before, and we are definitely having to wake up to that. So I really worry. I mean, I can't do anything about it, but I'm sort of frustrated. I can't do anything about, for example, COVID in the camps in Yemen or in Syria, or in India where the populations are so broad. And what is my responsibility as a human being on this earth, to, and I suppose being aware of it and talking about it is a good start.
Absolutely. I think before we explore that further, because that's a very relevant prediction to talk about, I think it's also important for us to reflect back, on your legacy and the perspective that you bring with that. And, we've read that during your time at BFI, the organization has expanded, as remit of the UK's national lottery, for example, distribution for film. You've oversaw the creation of the BFI 2022, the video that you shared with us, the 5-year strategy to boost the UK's national film industry. That's really, really impressive. And more importantly, the introduction of the BFI's diversity standards, which have now been adopted by BBC Film, the Film Forum, BAFTA. So all really incredible
And the
achievements.
academy in LA
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we
just
thought
last
it's
week. It
only
was brilliant.
we thought it's only fitting that we actually start by giving a bit of a nod and share with the audience the amazing impact that you've left on the BFI.
Yeah, this is just a little special magic that we've created just for you, Amanda.
Wow, this is amazing. I've always wanted my own viewing room, and this would certainly fit the bill. Now I'm just going to move to my favorite seat here. This is where I'd sit if I was in here. Smack
Lovely.
center screen.
Yep.
Fantastic. I have to stop myself sitting down. That's a good sign. I'll go here. Wow. You have to dance along. Come on, guys. This is celebrating film.
How can one person be involved in so many incredible projects? We would actually love to hear a little bit about BFI 2022 and your role in that, because you've mentioned, an individual impact on how a person can empower others, and I feel like you've done exactly that with this. So it would be a great place to maybe start.
I mean, I think the most important thing that any CEO has to do is to make things happen. You have to make things happen, because the really interesting thing is that when you lead an organization, people get their sense of motivation and excitement by seeing that they have achieved and made things happen. And obviously all that you've seen on that fantastic trailer, and just extraordinary clever people within the BFI did all that research to put it together. But really, I think leadership is about finding the right people and then just giving them the space to get on with and do what they do best. And so you were talking about the diversity standards, for example, which are completely fantastic, or the BFI Film Academy, or some of the fantastic cultural work. I don't sit there coming up with these amazing things. It's because I'm surrounded, or was surrounded, by extraordinary creative and very clever people. working for the BFI is also incredibly motivational. It's a not-for-profit, so you are there to make good things happen, to do good. And so I remember we were once sponsored by a big corporation, and they said to me that if they could bottle the motivation and energy that there was in the BFI and sprinkle it over their corporation, they'd zoom up and their share price would shoot up immediately. So I think there is that sense of, being there to do good, and there is a level of passion and drive and pride within the BFI that achieves stuff like that. But it also links back to what I was talking about earlier about the haves and the haves-not. And the diversity standards aren't just, so just to explain what they are, the diversity standards are a way of, it started off with encouraging everybody we funded and everybody we worked with. We said, we're only going to work with you if you're prepared to commit to being much more inclusive and to demonstrate, according to these standards, how inclusive you could be. And that shows itself throughout all that the BFI does. So when it's BFI 2022 is about future audiences, future this, future that, because we know that it's about expanding the horizons and creating much greater opportunities for the young, for the people of the future. And that was our real driver, I think, behind that.
Amazing. And I mean, in one of your interviews, you actually mentioned that when you first started as a CEO, you walked into this extraordinary yet very traditional organization that was in need of very practical, fast modernization. So I would imagine this is one of the main challenges facing companies today. And what is the advice for those facing this daunting challenge that you would give?
So it's a really, really good question, because I did walk into an organization, it's a long time ago, 17 years ago, which was very deflated, very lacking in confidence, and financially incredibly fragile. And when I look back over those 17 years, I wish I'd had enough confidence to have moved the organization forward faster. I mean, I think I could have got to a better place probably 18 months quicker. And in the context of 17 years, you might say that, well, what is 18 months? But actually, 18 months when you're living through complicated things and people are unhappy, it feels like a very long time. So I wish obviously at the time I didn't have the confidence, but for those who watch this fantastic recording and are perhaps leading an organization and are heading into very complicated times, I would always say to them, look, gather every drop of confidence that you've got and just go for it. Because there is never one completely right way for any organization. And the whole point of leadership is that you determine where the organization should be go, and then you work with your senior teams to devise, to improve it. I mean, whenever I had an idea, my senior colleagues would always make that idea, or they'd either kill it because it was rubbish, or they would work with me and it would be an awful lot better by the time they'd finished knocking it around. But I think once you've decided on that change, it is better for the organization to really crunch through. And if there are people who are, because it nearly always means, changing people, and that the most difficult bit is where there are people who are good enough but not really behind that project. And that can be so draining of your own energy, and it isn't good for the organization. So I would always might say you need to have a conversation with those people and help them either move on, because you aren't in charge of their lives, they are, or you have to have a conversation where at the end of it they're going to get behind where you're going. So I always say, just go for it, just be brave enough and drag up that confidence, because I think we would have got further with the BFI if I'd had more confidence at that.
So Amanda, I loved your kind of prediction for the future when you looked at, the haves and the have-nots, and how important it is at this time for people to really embrace the power of kindness. In terms of business, very, very inspired by, I guess, your major achievements in the industry and your contribution. to film and to women and to diversity and to, but, you know, I think what is really kind of poignant, I think, at this time is really to reflect on how are people feeling right now. And in terms of COVID, there's a lot of chaos that has been created. People are quite stretched. There's a lot of firefighting, a lot of uncertainty, and this can be quite exhausting, frankly. You know, right now, I think a lot of leaders are asking themselves, how can we really ensure our people are happy in times like this? And how can we really help them bring out their best? This is what I would love to hear from you. You know, what does it actually mean to be happy in a company?
So, I mean, one of the facts you have to face up to, there are some statistics that you're never going to get 100% of people in a company happy. You know, I think it's something like 40% will be happy at any one time, 40 are undecided, and 40 probably unhappy. And you sort of, when you're leading a company, you have to, you know, live with that sort of scenario. But happiness can, you know, for me, it's a word I prefer to use rather than sort of motivation and vision and things, because I think happiness is achieved when you understand, when you go to work, the contribution that you are making to that company, and you can understand where the company is going and what part that you have played in that. At the BFI, our head of HR did this really important thing with all new recruits, and because there was about 500 people in the BFI, so there was turnover, you know, probably about 7-10% a year, I would think. And so you'd get 40 or so new people entering the organisation, and there was a fantastic induction, a couple of days induction, and I was always given the first slot with that, or, you know, earliest slot. And one of the most important messages that I used to say to people is that, well, first of all, is when they joined the company, they were probably more valuable than they might be later on, because they arrived with a completely new pair of eyes, and they might see things within the organisation which we had all become blind to. And please, would they share that with us? Because I thought it was really important. So it gives them a sense of real value as soon as people come into the organisation. Then the second thing, which was really important to me in terms of value, was I would say everybody in the organisation is as important as everybody else. So of course the finance director has got a lot more responsibility, but it doesn't make him more important, for example, than the person in reception. So my big message was, it only takes one person in the company to let down the whole of that team, and everybody is just as important as the other, and we need to try and behave like that. You know, one needs to try. Of course, it's very hard to achieve, and I never fully achieved it, but I would talk about this mantra of hierarchies being something which are actually not helpful or constructive to any organisation's performance or speed of development.
So practically, what would that mean for a leader in a company who is dealing with that current structure of a bit more hierarchical organization? Is there any first steps you could suggest? Because it is a big issue, and I love your take on it, but practically for people who are watching this, what would you suggest as first steps?
Well, this is the other thing that it took me years to realise about being a leader. That if you are a leader or CEO of an organisation, you are there because I think that's what you like doing. And the majority of people actually don't want that. They don't want the responsibility, and they are very happy. But what they really want is, they want to see somebody who is leading in a way which is very, very believable and compelling and feels good and right. And when you are in that position of leading and you set that, and again, I really believed as a leader, I would always speak very truthfully from my heart. I always tried to avoid corporate speak. I always tried to avoid speaking the official language, if you like. You know, I would always speak and be completely, honest about things. And because I think you have a responsibility as a CEO and a leader, because people will hear what you're saying and will interpret it. So as small as it might seem, the most important thing is what you say and the way in which you say it, and be seen to say it. So again, at the BFI, we did something which I'm such an advocate of. And in my early years at the BFI, I was very nervous of them because it's quite a challenging scenario. So we would hold all staff meetings 4 times a year, only for 2 or 3 hours, and magnificently organised by colleagues. There would be 5 or 6 presentations, and we would always make certain that those presentations were by second, third, fourth tier management. And there was a sort of competition that grew about, who could make their presentation the funniest, the most entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a real way to celebrate the brilliance around the organisation. But there would be a session at the end, which was an open Q&A. And the rules were you could ask any question you like, but it had to be polite and courteous and, not rude. And I think it's really valuable for organizations, and obviously if you're in a bigger organization, you can't do it face to face. I think the value of being able to see the CEO not propped up by all the, people that help write speeches and stuff around it, but actually there, and to ask human questions and to get a proper human answer. I think that is the best way to start changing and to cement a culture within an organization.
Amazing. Super valuable.
Yeah, I absolutely love that kind of authenticity, that kind of realness that's needed from CEOs. I think that's what people are going to gravitate or need now. As you said, Carolina, is that practical first step to, creating a culture where people are happy because they do believe and trust, in that CEO. And as you said, what they're hearing from that CEO is something that they can really, as I said, get energized, but also, again, believe in as well. So absolutely. I mean, that is gold dust, I'm sure, for a lot of our leaders. You touched upon, again, you keep saying the have and the have-nots, which really is kind of stuck in my mind. And that's really a powerful, I guess, play on words or use of words, because I guess right now there's a lot of sensitivity and a lot of, I guess, emotional kind of dialogue around, diversity, inclusion, and, are people really being given the opportunities that they deserve? This is something that we would really love to discuss, because you've done brilliant work at the BFI to address the inequality in the film industry with projects, like the BFI Film Academy. And, I'm sure you must feel encouraged and more and more people are putting, the spotlight on issues of inequality with movements like Black Lives Matter, for example. What does diversity mean to you, Amanda? And what do you think businesses could be doing better to embrace diversity?
So for me, I always nowadays use the word inclusion, and I think it's about including everybody. So with the diversity, people in their heads tend to jump to an immediate section of diversity, such as Black or Asian, whereas actually everybody in the world is an individual in their own right, and it's about being inclusive as an organization for everybody and putting in those checks and balances. Now, of course, it's much more complicated than that, and diversity and inclusion has been an enormous journey for me, because there are very few CEOs. In fact, there's very few people in the world that you talk to who say it's rubbish and don't want anything to do with it. Everybody actually in their hearts wants to be seen as excellence in including everybody. But it's much more difficult, because if you're a CEO, you are programmed to see a problem, to work out what the issues are and fix it. And in fact, that's often, but often how you're measured as a CEO, whether you can sort out what the obstacles are and push them out of your way. But in fact, with diversity isn't like that. Diversity and inclusion isn't like that. You've got to live it. You've got to constantly learn from it. You've got to be humble. You've got to read. I mean, there are so many good books on the market at the moment which explain so much of it is about increasing your breadth of awareness of other people's experience and other people's lives. So I think, again, if you were trying to introduce inclusion into your own organization, there are very concrete things that you really ought to be doing, so you should be ensuring that when you're recruiting new people, you're thinking about the recruitment panel, how you're recruiting in. I absolutely think you should be putting in targets for the organisation to make sure, for example, that there's a gender balance, that your boards are like this. So I think these are very solid things. I think you need to be looking at all of your print. What does your organisation look like on print? Is it a row of white faces? Are there enough women in there? Is it enough mix?
Mm-hmm.
Look at your tone of language and how you speak. But beyond that, there is a cultural thing, which is about increasing yours and everybody else's understanding of the richness of the world we live in, and the cultural richness that exists, that is often beyond your own personal experience. So, I mean, one of the things at the BFI that I was, and again, this is absolute, my colleagues who drove this forward, is that we embraced diversity and inclusion on every single level. So of course we did the managerial things, we did the funding things, but culturally we set out, not me, that I had an amazing creative director called Heather Stewart, and she set out almost to reshape our understanding of film culture through the big, we used to call them blockbusters, through the big cultural blockbusters that happened to sort of rewrite people's understanding of what film culture was like, so that it was much more inclusive. So I think you need a 3D approach to it. You need to look at the culture as well as all the practical things you can do. I haven't even had the opportunity to ask you any questions. I was just wondering, I mean, because in a way, virtual reality, this amazing experience we're doing, is, I mean, it gets rid of differences, doesn't it? It puts everybody onto exactly the same arena. So I can't judge by what you look like or anything like that. So I don't know whether you'd had any thoughts about the use of this amazing technology that you guys are pioneering. How are you going to use it in the context of the haves and have-nots and diversity? Have you thought about any of that?
This is a really, really good question, Amanda, because this world that we're in was created for the purpose of, uniting global teams in enterprise. And when I say uniting, helping, enterprise be able to, empower their employees to be able to collaborate in a more meaningful way from anywhere in the world, anytime, effortlessly. But also, more importantly, when it comes to learning, which, as you know, is a very important theme for enterprise, it's about how do we really help our employees learn faster, but also be able to have access to that learning whenever they need it, so at the right time that they need it. And at scale, that's very expensive. And that's also very hard to do that consistently and to really ensure that everyone is learning at the same level and the same quality of training is being delivered. So yes, one of the biggest questions we get from our clients is, when it comes to the avatars, they're like, well, can these avatars be changed? Can they look more human-like? Or there's a big discussion about the look of the avatars for that very reason, because for a lot of our clients, it's about making, I guess, a world where people can feel equal, where people don't focus on the silly things that they do in real life, worrying about what clothes are you wearing, do you look like you're in fashion or not fashion, are you overweight or not overweight, are you black or are you white, that those things fall away, so that when you step into this world, you really immerse yourself into a place where you can really just enjoy whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's networking or having a conversation, training, whatever it is. It's just really for people to focus on, as I said, the things that are important rather than the things that divide. So it is an ongoing discussion, and I'm sure, as I said, when we can also talk about it at length, because this is a big debate in terms of how the technology is progressing and what's possible in terms of what we can do with these avatars. But most of our clients say that they love, as you said, the kind of neutrality of the avatars.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's a great question, so thank you for asking.
Yeah.
You're welcome. I think the only challenge you've got is, which I think will settle down as we all get used to these, is that the spaces that you're in, I'm in as a complete first visitor to this extraordinary, amazing world you've created. Sometimes
Mm.
it's a bit difficult to concentrate on your questions because it's so beautiful.
That's a
But I
good
think,
thing. Your imagination should be running wild when you're here.
Yeah.
So actually,
so,
touching upon that, I think the perspective we're in being so high up lends itself nicely for some reflections.
mhm.
Looking at your journey specifically as a woman who, getting your first job in the 60s, working your way up really over the last 50 years, breaking records. I mean, being honored as the commander of the British Empire is incredible. You certainly have a lot of lessons to share, which we selfishly would love to learn from. What words of advice would you really like to share with our viewers?
Most important thing, no matter where you are in your work life, is be true to yourself and be authentic. Always tell the truth and tell it as you mean it from your heart, because people can tell the difference between spouting stuff you're supposed to spout and actually saying what you believe. And I think that's so important. And I think particularly in leadership, even if they don't like where you're leading them to, if they know it's being done with integrity and from your heart and you really believe in it, and and sometimes it goes wrong and you stand up and say, look, this didn't work out, I thought it would. I think being completely truthful and honest and straightforward is the most important thing. People will forgive you then when things don't quite go right.
It takes a lot of courage, certainly. I'm sure it's something we're both learning all the time, but I would have to
Yes,
agree on
I
that.
think I love that, and I agree with Carolina absolutely, Amanda, because bringing your whole self to work, or even just
Mm,
every day, just bringing that whole self is very hard. A lot of times, you're dealing with insecurity, you're dealing with self-doubt, you're dealing with contraptions of what the etiquette should be and how you should
yeah.
look and how you should say this in this context, and to be that free to just express yourself, as you said, authentically with integrity. It can move mountains, as said, if the leaders really adopt that kind of mentality. But luckily, our CEO and our leaders and our company, I feel that. I feel that we're lucky enough to be in an environment where you are inspired by the leaders above you who, as you said, are always going to be open and positive, and
Yeah.
that lends itself as well. You react the same way. You want to share because they are sharing openly. So definitely
That's so
agree.
nice to hear. That's so nice to hear. So nice
I
to
think
hear.
one thing on a personal level, I'm a bit selfish as well. As a parent, I'm a parent like yourself, and I understand you're a grandparent as well. um, it's very difficult for a parent to balance that work-life balance. But of course, now we have a new challenge with working from home for a lot of people and
Yeah.
balancing, know, just everything, children, childcare, everything is just kind of a bit crazy at the moment. And, you yourself were CEO of a high profile, organization, which I'm sure demanded a lot of your time. And, how did you do it? How did you, actually, lead with such integrity and such beauty and elegance, and also manage a household and raise two wonderful ladies? What were the sacrifices that you had to make that all come together?
I think, yeah, I mean, it's really, really difficult, isn't it? I mean, it is really, really hard. And I was talking to somebody just earlier this week. I think that when you're a parent and you're working, when you're at home, you feel guilty because perhaps you ought to be at work. When you're at work, you feel guilty because you ought to be at home. And then there are all those terrible times when the two worlds clash. Your child's ill or has had an accident in the playground, or there's an emergency at work and you promise to take them to Disneyland or something. I mean, it's absolutely fraught. And I do feel very strongly about it because I've lived it and been through it. And I always felt particularly empathetic to young parents within the BFI, and particularly women, because it's usually the women that take the maternity leave. I mean, they go through birth and they take the maternity leave, and then they come back after a year. And I remember going back into the workplace after I'd had my second child, and I remember standing outside. This just before I joined the Royal Photographic Society, and I remember standing outside before the interview, and I was still breastfeeding, and I remember standing outside this room and thinking, I'm just going to cry and run away, because the notion, you know, that you could go from the chaos and everything, and, you know, in your smart gear and walk into this room and a load of people and be all grown up, felt like such, you know, such an enormous gap. So I remember that feeling now, and that was 36 years ago. So I always, and I just hope that as the more, you know, as more parents, or when parents join organisations, we need to be really empathetic, you know. And in the BFI, I always wanted to try, and I don't know if I achieved this, but I wanted particularly mothers who'd been out for a year, when they came back, to know that I knew that it was really complicated, that emotionally for them it's really hard leaving a child in a nursery to begin with for quite a few months, you know, particularly if the child, not all of them takes to it. But also I wanted them to know that they should prioritise their children, you know, in those first few years. And if something came up and they just had to go, they should go without dragging a great big bucket of guilt along with them too, you know. Because there's been so many studies as well that if you're worrying about productivity or anything like that, actually, parents usually overcompensate in any case. So again, it comes back to that word of kindness, doesn't it? How can we be empathetic? You know, the human race isn't going to continue unless we're able to create a society that enables people of the age of producing children to contribute. So again, it's setting up that culture and making it as empathetic as possible. But I don't think people take advantage of it. I think quite the opposite. I think it builds loyalty, enormous loyalty in the organisation, if people feel secure as a parent working in that organisation and are able to balance their work and home life without that guilt.
You touched on something actually really interesting about that, because I feel like the same holds true to work from home.
I think you're so right. I think the workplace is going to change completely, and I think for the better. I don't think it'll be 100% at home, and it's definitely not going to be 100% in the office. It's going to be an intelligent mix of those. I think that, I mean, I was seeing it yesterday with my youngest daughter, she's got 2 young children, and her husband's been working at home. And, you know, kept popping out of his office and having a game of footy with this 2-year-old who got back to nursery, then whipping back back into his office to carry on. I think psychologically for him, he'll be happier, more stable. He's not wasting his life commuting. Lovely that he can see his child grow up. I think it's fantastic for the children to see that role model of, you know, parents, you know, working from home. Having said all of that, of course, coming back to the practicalities, there are people for whom it is much harder because there isn't a room in the home. You know, they've got too many children at home, and actually it could be hell, which is why I think there has to be that smart mix, a much more fluid environment. But COVID definitely will have helped organisations understand that productivity can be just as good with a partial mix of working from home. I was just to finish on that though, the reason I don't think it should be 100% necessarily is because, and I was talking to, in fact, one of our old board members just last week, who's an absolute guru in business management, and he was saying that, you know, you learn a lot by watching when you're at work. You know, it's a bit like having an apprenticeship. You know, you watch how people behave on the phone, you watch how they get things done, and I know personally, when I look back, particularly at the beginning, well, even now, watch people and learn all the time. So I think the notion that we're all going to retreat into our home offices isn't going to happen. There needs to be a smart mix. I mean, I actually think it's really exciting.
I think, Amanda, on that note, and you've given us so much food for thought, and I know it's probably you know this question is coming because of your your film background. I think we need to talk about favorite films at this point. one of my favorite English films of all time is The English Patient by Anthony Minghella.
Yeah.
Full of passion, full of beauty, full of kindness of strangers, kindness of lovers.
Yeah.
I mean, just kindness all over it. But it would be great, to hear from you and Carolina what your top 3 favorite British films under your reign.
That would be a death-threatening thing for me to admit. I couldn't just pick out 3 because there are so many amazing. And if you wouldn't mind, I want to duck it by just turning it on its head and saying
Sure.
that there are films that I know that are just about to come out that I'm desperate to see. So the closing night of the BFI London Film Festival is Francis Lee's new film, Ammonite, and Francis made that fantastic film called God's Own Country, and he's a good old Yorkshireman, is Francis. And I'm a huge admirer of his work, and I cannot wait to see Ammonite. So I think under the theme of always looking to the future, I'm going to go for Ammonite.
Thank you.
Well, we can't wait to see it. That's for sure. So Amanda, every episode of The Real Place ends on a nomination, and we'd love to know who you'd like to join us in The Real Place next time.
Okay, here goes.
Lovely.
Can you read that? Is it readable? Oh, good. Thank goodness for that. That's lucky. Greg Dyke.
All right, Greg. Greg expects the call from Amanda very soon. Lovely. We very much look forward to having Greg with us. Amanda, again, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bless you. Thank you. I'm sorry to exit your world. Well, the honour is all mine, trust me. Okay.